BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And today I will be once again joined by Michael Cole, the author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. And I want to let you guys know that today's episode is partially sponsored by Michael Cole, and as previously stated, he's the author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. If the Zodiac case fascinates you, be sure to check out the Zodiac Revisited. It's a deep dive into the mystery with a unique and interesting perspective. The trilogy is available on Amazon, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite true crime books. And if you enjoy the series, please consider helping Michael out by leaving a 5-star review. And before I get Michael back on the program, I want to share something with you guys real fast, and that is, a lot of people wonder, how can we actually solve the Zodiac Killer mystery? How can we actually identify the serial killer from the 1960s? And the Zodiac is someone who not only committed murders, he also wrote letters, and he designed the famous ciphers, as well as greeting cards and diagrams. So the Zodiac mailed in a lot of information, and some people believe that the Zodiac had assistance with the mailings. Other people believe that he brought the stuff to the mailboxes himself, and that he was handling the stamps and the envelopes. So no matter what, it seems like the Zodiac came into contact with the letters and the papers that were mailed. So some people are wondering, can we use AI to do some type of investigation into the Zodiac case? Can AI help solve the Zodiac Killer mystery? And it's something that we've been dealing with heavily for about 2.5 years now. Prior to that, of course, it was always on the radar that there would be new advancements in forensic investigations, new advancements in technologies. But a lot of people ask me this: do you think AI will be helpful in solving the Zodiac Killer mystery? And I say, yes, why not? But one reason why I'm bringing this up is the exact opposite direction. Because some people also say, hey Ned, what's the point in a Zodiac Killer news report? What's the point of talking about the Zodiac Killer every Monday? And right now I actually have something very important with you that I actually want to use this program for, to just raise awareness of, and that is how AI can be misused, and how AI can absolutely abuse these types of true crime cases, especially some of the older ones. For example, there was a channel out there, and it actually should still be up at this time, called Unbelievable Tales, that released a video about the Zodiac Killer suspect, William McDuff Andrew. And this is called New Details Emerge in the Zodiac Killer Case, Possibly Identified. And this appears to have been an AI-written script, so I think anyway, and it also appears to have been just what looks like an AI-created video. It just has some of those hallmarks. It has some giveaways where it doesn't seem like it's purely been created by humans. But it doesn't only talk about William McDuff Andrew. There's some different suspects that are discussed at the beginning. Then it switches to Mac at about the 12-minute mark. It's 24 minutes and 13 seconds long. One more time on the channel, Unbelievable Tales. But it's just spreading pure disinfo. And one thing that I hope I can do on the Zodiac Killer News Report is talk to you guys about how there's going to be more and more of this. There's going to be a much larger presence of people using pre-written scripts that aren't even just going to miss a few points here or there, that are going to get a few facts wrong. I make mistakes all the time. I don't know everything. And, I mean, a lot of us do, but this is above and beyond. This is just having a computer program write your script, trying to vilify someone for being the Zodiac Killer, and it's not even kinda close. So I'm going to play a clip here from the channel Unbelievable Tales that is going to talk about William McDuff Andrew as a Zodiac Killer suspect, and then let's respond to it.
William McDuff Andrew. known by those who encountered him simply as the Mac. This emerging suspect has been brought into the spotlight by Mike Morford, a respected true crime researcher and co-host of the Zodiac Speaking podcast. Morford, who has dedicated years to digging through the Zodiac's cryptic letters, witness testimonies, and public records, believes Andrew deserves serious consideration. When you start looking into William McDuff Andrew, Morford has said, you can't help but feel that eerie twinge in your gut. He doesn't just check one or two boxes, he checks almost all of them. William McDuff Andrew was born in California in the early 1930s and raised in the Bay Area, the same region where the Zodiac would later strike fear into communities. After high school, Andrew served in the U.S. Air Force during the Korean War. According to military files, he showed a distinct aptitude for cryptography, radio operations, and aerial navigation. These are not only highly specialized skills, but eerily similar to those used in the construction of the Zodiac's now infamous coded messages. When he returned to civilian life, Andrew settled back in Northern California and worked for a time as a typesetter at a local San Francisco newspaper. In retrospect, it's a job that gave him unique access to publishing tools and the language manipulation techniques visible in Zodiac's letters. Andrew's lifestyle was peculiar and reclusive. He moved frequently under aliases, had few friends, and maintained a bizarre attachment to military clothing long after his service ended. He was often seen wandering the streets of Vallejo and near Lake Berryessa, both scenes of Zodiac activity, though at the time, few thought anything of it. One former co-worker recalled that Andrew was obsessed with secret codes and would often scribble cryptic symbols in small notebooks during lunch breaks. He was described as intensely private, prone to sudden outbursts, and often stared blankly into space while mumbling to himself. The behavioral parallels between Andrew and the Zodiac Killer are difficult to dismiss. Beyond his cryptographic knowledge and Bay Area presence, Andrew had the mental profile many experts believe matched the Zodiac. Later in life, he was reportedly institutionalized for what one psychiatric report described as paranoid delusions with violent ideation. A nurse recalled reading some of Andrew's writings and being so disturbed by their violent and cryptic nature that she filed a formal concern with the hospital's director, though no follow-up was ever documented. The coincidences don't end there. According to Morford, Andrew was known to a small circle of acquaintances as the Mac, a nickname eerily echoed in a mysterious 1969 prison letter. In that letter, intercepted but never conclusively tied to the Zodiac, someone calling themselves Mac describes killing for the thrill of it. The letter's syntax, cadence, and cryptic language bore striking similarities to the confirmed Zodiac correspondence.
And one more time, that was from the channel Unbelievable Tales. Now, I took this video and I posted it on Facebook, and when Mike Morford saw this, he simply responded by saying, "What the hell?" Because he's featured in the video multiple times, and I think it's so odd that they use Morph's real videos appropriately and accurately. They also talk about him hosting the Zodiac Speaking podcast with Richard Grinnell. All of that is fine. It's the info about McDuff that is completely wrong. So let's go through some of that real fast. Number one, McDuff was not born in the 1930s. McDuff was born in the 1940s, and you can even do a quick Google search and see that his obituary states that he was born in 1945. So that's just wrong from the absolute get-go. McDuff was 23 at the time of the Zodiac Killer's first crimes, the Lake Herman Road murders. He had his birthday on Valentine's Day, actually. McDuff was born on Valentine's Day, February 14th of 1945, and he would have been 24 during the majority of Zodiac Killer activity. And this whole thing about McDuff serving in the Korean War, the Korean War was from 1950 to 1953. McDuff would have been 5 years old at the start of the Korean War. So McDuff coming back to California with PTSD from Korea is a little bit improbable, considering that he was 5 years old. Even if you want to go to the end of the war, he would have been 8 years old, going on 9 years old. This stuff is all blatantly false. And much as I stated during the introduction, I don't know everything, so I can't pinpoint absolutely every false story in this, but so many things were just absolutely new for me, and that was that McDuff was somebody who was incarcerated in a mental hospital, and he wrote this letter that in these stories that just absolutely disturbed one of the people who worked there, so they reported him to a hospital administrator. I have no idea if that is true or false. And here's another thing. I don't even know anything about McDuff serving in the military, but what I do think happened, and I'm going to be very clear about this is differentiating from something that is concrete, like his birth date and him serving in the Korean War. This is something that I'm going to speculate on, and that is that I think that this was written with an AI program that took elements of other Zodiac Killer suspects and their stories, and they included some other real elements of William McDuff Andrews' life and put it together. What I think happened is, specifically, they were looking at details that had been written about Ross Sullivan and Richard Gaikowski. Both Ross Sullivan and Richard Gaikowski were incarcerated psychiatrically, and let's use lighter terms. Let's use lighter terms. They both spent time in mental hospitals, and Ross Sullivan was the one who wrote disturbing poetry. Not in the hospital, mind you. He wrote that when he was in Riverside, California in 1966, but he's the one who actually liked to wear military-style clothing, even though he wasn't in the military, and Geik actually was, though, in the Army. Geik was a former Army medic. So what I think this did is that it pretty much ripped off the stories of Ross Sullivan and Richard Gaikowski, and it tried to make it appear just a little bit different, and then they just slapped William McDuff Andrews' name and photos on it. Now, this whole thing about how there's this prison letter that's called the Mac letter or the Big Mac letter, or just some type of prison letter that mentions anybody named Mac, the Mac letter, I know nothing about that, so I cannot comment on it. They certainly didn't provide an image of that for the video. Instead, they were using a photo of the 340 cipher and the dripping pen card. So ultimately, that's where I would stand. I would state that they just don't have their facts right, they don't have the info right, and definitely they made very, very costly errors. I just think that this video was a giant mistake, and when I first watched it, it had 20,000 views. Now it has 47,000 views. So these types of prepackaged videos are just made to get people's attention, but they are spreading pure lies. They're just spreading pure pieces of misinformation about individuals that were never charged with their crimes. And that is totally different than somebody conducting an honest investigation. This would be a dishonest investigation, or this would be hijacking somebody's investigation and then just absolutely miscategorizing everything. I mean, the person who posted this video probably could have spent an hour on the internet actually gathering real things that Mike Morford has said. How about just Googling William McDuff Andrews? It's not like there are a million William McDuff Andrews who lived in Northern California in the 1960s, and they could have found his real birth date and read about what he was doing in the 1960s and all of those things. So I just think that they did a very, very dishonest thing with this. And one more time, it's on the channel Unbelievable Tales, which I'm just simply going to be looking out for in the future. If I see anything else from them, I'm going to be horribly, horribly skeptical. But before I bring Michael Cole back on the program, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. Anybody can support this channel with buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the research for this program, for things that go into shows like Zodiac Monday, as well as for things like the shorts that come out Monday through Friday here on YouTube, mostly talking about serial killers and true crime news, but you can find those on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. On Instagram and TikTok, I'm under the names blackboxonlineradio. And next, of course, we have River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery, thank you as well for your regular and consistent support. And River Prawn Pottery sent me something, and that was the Consult Podcast. A couple of people asked if I would do a direct response to the Consult Podcast. And after I play the interview clip with Michael Cole, I'm going to do that. This is available at truecrimeconsult.com, and they did a multi-part series on the Zodiac Killer, and I'm going to be responding to part one. And these are some things that came out recently in 2025, just about, several weeks ago at the time of this recording, and they're going to be talking all about the world of criminal profiling. So thank you, River Prawn Pottery, for that recommendation, and I'll respond to it very soon. And we also have one from CZ Guy. You three have been absolutely amazing. I really do appreciate everything that you've done for the channel, not only contributions, but also recommending things to be discussed here on Black Box Online Radio. And we also have one here from Michael G. on buymeacoffee.com. Michael G. says, "Howdy, Ned. I appreciate the channel and all you do. I would like to get your thoughts on what vehicle Zodiac would have been driving at Lake Berryessa. It would have been a front track width of 57 inches and the ability to wear both 7 and 6-inch tires. I believe the smaller tire was likely being used as a spare after one tire popped. My favorite candidates for vehicles are the 1962-64 Willys Overland Jeep Wagon or a 1963-67 Chevy Nova. Have a wonderful day." Well, I'm going to respond to this very quickly, but I'm also going to preface this by saying that I'm not an expert on auto mechanics, but what he's talking about is when they looked at the tire tracks that possibly came from the Zodiac Killer, then they were thinking that one of the tires didn't seem to be completely in line with another tire. It's almost as if there was a spare tire that had been taken and put in place of another car. They're called the mismatched tire tracks. And when I was asked about this on a live stream recently, I said the first thing that I had ever heard about these tire tracks was I'm going to get to the point. It was in the book, The Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986, and that book stated that the tire tracks most likely did not come from the killer, that they were too old, but that book did not provide a source, and it's written by Thomas Henry Horan. However, when he did appear in his documentary, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, he explained what his source for that was, but it's been 2 years since I've seen that. It has slipped my mind. Now, what would the Zodiac Killer have been driving to Lake Berryessa? This thing here talking about the Chevy, I think that could be very possible, because one thing that's just been discussed is maybe the Zodiac Killer was driving a Chevy. Could it be the 63 to 67 Chevy Nova? I mean, maybe. And this is something that came up during the Blue Rock Springs shooting, where some people even think the Zodiac drove a Chevy Corvair to Blue Rock Springs. Another possible description of the car was a Ford Falcon. But, you might be spot on with that. And, I just want to point out those are the pieces of evidence that I've heard, or the interpretations of the evidence. One, maybe that wasn't even the killer's car with the mismatched tire tracks, but it seems like the Zodiac knew how to drive. I think the Zodiac got to Lake Berryessa in a car. I think he drove himself there. And, this thing about the Chevy Nova, I'm going to look more into that, and I think that that's a good start. Thank you so much, Michael G. And our next one comes to us from Michael Cole, of course. And he states, "Thank you, Ned, for your outstanding work and ensuring that the Zodiac case remains in the public consciousness." Michael Cole, I appreciate that. And we have one from Sam Fisher, who says, "Great episode and keep up the good work." Sam Fisher on buymeacoffee.com. That is greatly appreciated. And we also have a follow-up with one from Batman66, who says, "Batman bought you a coffee." I never get tired from saying that. That's twice this week from Batman66. All is greatly appreciated. Enjoyed your latest interview with Michael Cole, Ned. The hardest working guy in the true crime universe. Well, I do put in a lot of time for these episodes, and I also put in a lot of time discussing true crime content with you guys, but I love absolutely every minute of it, and I just want to thank all of these supporters here on buymeacoffee.com, and it's all greatly appreciated. And one final announcement before we get to the interview with Michael Cole. As some of you may have noticed here on Black Box Online Radio, I've been doing some bonus episodes on Thursdays about the Zodiac Killer, and this week there will be a bonus episode that will be coming out, but it will be done in a different way. Normally, I just do some follow-up notes about a book that I've read, or I'm talking to you guys about a Zodiac Killer suspect that I haven't covered in an individual suspect profile, but this week I will be doing my first Zodiac reaction video, where I will be reacting to another creator's content, and it's going to be done in a bit of a different way, a little bit more similar to the way that I was discussing the Unbelievable Tales video. But you can look out for that here on Thursday. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with these Zodiac Killer episodes. And you can also listen on Wednesdays for an episode about Jack the Ripper, and Fridays for an episode about D.B. Cooper. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Michael Cole back to the program. And we are going to pick up with the Kathleen Johns incident, the attempted abduction off of Highway Route 132 on March 22nd of 1970. And Michael, as I understand, you've also made a lot of observations about a possible Zodiac crime, and that is the attempted abduction of Kathleen Johns off of Highway Route 132, which occurred on March 22nd of 1970. Would you like to tell us about the Kathleen Johns incident?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a little dismayed that Kathleen Johns isn't sort of more normally thought of as a Zodiac victim. I think there's very high probability that she was indeed abducted by the Zodiac. Couple points related to Kathleen Johns. A lot of people talk about the Modesto Bee article that was published in the wake of the incident. And I never really understood that, to be perfectly honest, because the San Francisco Examiner also published an article with effectively the same information. So if the killer was going to be seeing any article, it was likely the San Francisco Examiner article. But be that as it may, I talk about especially in volume 2 of my series, how the killer, one interesting aspect of what he does is that anytime he is required to interact with people, with his victims, as part of his crime, he uses what I call premeditated situational control. In other words, he spends time and effort figuring out what he's going to say and what he's going to do to elicit cooperation of his victims. So we see this in Lake Berryessa with the cover story, "Oh, I'm an escaped convict," basically communicating to them, if you just help me, I'll be out of here and everything will be fine, when of course that is not his intention at all. So of course the incident with Kathleen Johns is very much an instance of premeditated situational control. And it's a very specific form of premeditated situational control, which is what I call automotive sabotage followed by a Good Samaritan ruse. So, in other words, he finally convinces Kathleen Johns to pull over. He says, "Oh, hey, your wheel's wobbling, I'll fix it for you." And then he loosens almost all the lug nuts, and her car becomes inoperative. And then she's effectively forced to accept a ride from him. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is that this type of automotive sabotage followed by a Good Samaritan ruse is exactly what we see in the case of Sherry Jo Bates. So from my perspective, the more you believe one, the more you should believe the other. Now, it is a little bit different, and in fact, this one's a little bit extreme in terms of, in the case of Sherry Jo Bates, the killer likely disabled her car while she was not there. In the case of Kathleen Johns, he had to actually convince her to pull over in order to disable her car. But, those details notwithstanding, it's still a very similar type of premeditation. So now the other thing that's interesting and helpful with my description of the methodology and the timing is that it gives us a basis to sort of examine these crimes, an additional basis to examine these crimes. So, and what I mean to say here is that this crime is perfectly aligned with the spring equinox of 1970. And, I completely understand if people maybe don't buy into the whole solstices and equinoxes and this kind of thing. But this is, I think I make a compelling argument as to why it's true and why it could be true and why it should be true and what the killer is doing. And if you believe that, then you'll start to understand that that is another significant reason to believe that Kathleen Johns was indeed a victim of the Zodiac. Now, Howard Davis and Johnny Smith did an interview with Kathleen Johns back on January 1, 1998. Are you familiar with that interview?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so that is a very interesting, interview. It's about 2 hours long, and it has a lot of good information in it. So some of what actually a fair amount of what I think is based on that interview. Now, the thing is, I'm completely convinced that Jennifer, Kathleen's 10-month-old daughter, saved her life that night. Because, it's very likely, in my opinion, that the killer was waiting somewhere near Modesto onto the entrance of Highway 132. And that he was looking for a lone female driving. Now, Kathleen was driving a station wagon, and she describes how, it's the 1970s. How did we survive the 1970s? She put down the seats in the back of the station wagon and put Jennifer to sleep back there. So Jennifer would not have been visible in any way, shape, or form. So the killer likely saw Kathleen drive by, identified her as a young, lone female entering the highway, or two-lane road, really, and decided that was, she fit his profile and then went after her. And, he didn't really realize that Jennifer was with her. And for whatever reason, I think the killer was more than able and willing to murder Kathleen Johns, but for whatever reason, he didn't want to murder the baby. And interestingly, you can sort of see that dynamic at work in what Kathleen says. So Gray Smith mentioned this, but he kind of messed it up. Not surprisingly, I guess. Gray Smith says the killer was saying, "I'm going to throw the baby out the window." But in reality, what the killer is saying is he wanted Kathleen to throw the baby out the window. Throw that baby out the window. Now, of course, she didn't comply with that, right?
Of course not.
But I think that is very indicative of what's going on in the mind of the killer. This baby is a problem that he doesn't know how to deal with. He wants her to get rid of it so he can go on with his plan. But, of course, she's not going to do that. So, that's why I believe he ends up driving around for 2 hours, because he doesn't know what to do. This baby is really a problem. And as I said, I totally believe that Jennifer saved Kathleen's life that night.
So it sounds like there are a couple of things going on there. Oh, excuse me. I thought you were finished once again.
Well, I'm never finished, so please go ahead.
Well, thank you for that, Michael. But it sounds like that there's a combination of factors going on. And I would actually like to ask this question for a form of clarity. And that would be, it seems like, number one, the Zodiac Killer had animosity toward women, not children, so he didn't want to harm children, which is totally normal among serial killers. Just because they have homicidal tendencies does not mean they have homicidal tendencies toward everybody, like they could no problem killing an adult, but killing a child would be off limits to them. But it seems like there's also something else that's happening where the Zodiac would be.
Can I comment on that?
Yes.
So I think he. I mean, we know that he threatened school children, and I think that threat was in some way legitimate. And, people can argue whether he really intended to build a bus bomb or whether that was just, he was just saying that to make a terroristic threat. I personally think he probably intended to do it, but he probably bit off more than he could chew and wasn't able to actually do it. So I think there is some age limit in there. So I think he probably would have been okay with killing kids to a certain age. I don't know what age, right? But whatever it was, it seems like, Jennifer was 10 months old at the time, apparently. Wherever the line was, 10 months was below the line.
Oh, so you mean that he would have been comfortable attacking children, but not a 10-year-old child, because that would be like a
Not
baby.
a 10-month-old child.
All right, so I appreciate that point of clarity. But there was something else that you said, though, about how the Zodiac would almost be telling people things because he wants a desired outcome. And I heard two specific things there. The first is that it sounds like this is a very socially awkward person who has to think about his actions, like the way that he's doing math, the way that a lot of people with social awkward behaviors have to describe it. Even people who are on the spectrum also talk about it that way, where they have to have their verbal statements planned out. If they have a social interaction with someone, they have to know what they're going to say ahead of time, and, I'm going to insert this response in there, arranging it like a sequence. And the second one would be that it appears that maybe this is also a psychopathic tendency where this person is trying to say certain things to manipulate. And you brought up the case in point of Lake Berryessa. Now, was that what you were thinking, or were you thinking about it in a different way?
So I think there's probably something to that. He, almost certainly is a psychopath, it seems like. He probably does not interact well with other people. It's very reasonable conclusion based on his likely motivation, psychopathic hatred of women. So I think there's an element of that there that he likely can probably pass as normal for relatively short periods of time, but he isn't really normal. So I think there's probably some of that in terms of planning. If they say this, I'll say that, and he can probably appear normal if he has to for short periods of time. But the larger aspect of it when he's dealing with his victims is the eliciting the cooperation that he needs. So he's spending significant amount of time figuring out what he's going to say such that they will respond in the way that he wants them to respond. That's the essence of what I call the premeditated situational control.
Okay, so it's like about a bigger emphasis on arranging the statements to get desired responses as opposed to psychopathic manipulation.
Yeah. So, Lake Berryessa is sort of the canonical example. He's kind of making it very clear, I'm an escaped convict. If you give me what I want, I'm going to be gone. I'm going to Mexico. I'll be so far away from here, and you'll be back to normal. So just do what I want. Of course, when they start, Brian resists while getting tied up, he puts the gun to his head and says, I've killed, or at some point he also says, I've killed a man. So he says things to make sure that he's taken seriously, but the overarching sort of goal is to get them to believe that he is essentially harmless and he'll be gone if they just do what he says.
Okay, yes, though. But, Michael, are you okay with some speculative questions that would require us to look at the case and explore the uncertain?
Sure.
Do you think the Zodiac Killer actually said that he was from Deer Lodge Prison in Montana? Because I know it's debated.
Yeah, I think, I think so. Honestly, I think there's too much emphasis given to that. He just, in my estimation, he just picked some prison that was far from where he was, that actually existed. This is the mark of a good liar, is that there's some truth in the lie. So, if he would have picked a prison that was nearby, then maybe Brian and Cecilia would have been like, oh, I don't think somebody's going to escape from that prison, and I wouldn't have heard about it. If he would have just made up some prison name, maybe they'd probably been like, oh, okay, I never heard of that, I guess I'll listen more. Maybe they would have been a little more skeptical, who knows. But by picking some prison that does indeed exist that's far away, then, there's a very high probability if there was an escape from there, they wouldn't have heard about it. So it makes it sound that much more real. And if for some reason they happen to know of that prison, then they'll be like, oh yeah, I know that's a prison. That makes sense. So I know, other people talk about some aspect of suspects having some relation to your lodge prison or whatever. I don't think that really matters, to be honest. I think it was just something that he knew about, and he wanted to incorporate some grain of truth into his lie.
Next question. The Zodiac Killer wore a hooded costume at Lake Berryessa, which was similar to an executioner's hood. How does the hooded costume fit into your theory?
Well, I think, for one thing, he likely committed the murders at Gaviota, and he knew that things could go south. So he wanted some mechanism to hide his identity in case it did happen. But I think, he could have done that in any number of ways that are a lot easier. Certainly there was some ritualistic aspect to it. He undoubtedly derived sort of perverse somehow perversely derived pleasure out of inspiring fear in Brian and Cecilia. Yeah, I don't know if there's too much more we can say beyond that.
Okay then, this question though might seem like it's coming from an absolute different direction, but because one of your specialties is looking at the maps and the angles, this is something that I really wanted to ask you about, and that is that when we have the Phillips 66 map, a lot of people refer to the compass that was drawn on by the Zodiac Killer, but other people have also pointed out that a compass should say north, south, east, west. But the Zodiac drew a clock face on the map, 0369, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, right?
I take issue with people calling it a clock face. If it was a clock face, it would have 12, not 0. It's very definitely a compass rose.
Fair enough.
Started 0.
But why? Well, if he wanted to make a compass rose, this is my question: why wouldn't he just write north, south, east, west?
Because it's equivalent to the Zodiac, right? He's dividing that circle into 12 equal parts. just like the nighttime sky is divided into 12 equal parts. That's why the numbering is going from 0 to 11. He's essentially taking a compass rose and emphasizing the 30-degree slices and using it to divide up his theater of operation.
So he's almost like using a more advanced form of the compass, right?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I mean, the compass roses that they have on nautical maps are concentric circles with one of the circles aligned to true north and one of them aligned to magnetic north. The outer circles aligned to true north, the inner circles aligned to magnetic north. And the angle between true and magnetic is known as the angle of declination. But he's essentially taking that inner circle of the compass rose and dividing that up. The circles on a compass rose actually have full 360-degree divisions, and they're graduated in degrees. So they go from 0 to 359, I guess. He's taking that and emphasizing the 30-degree divisions by numbering from 0 through 11 and using that to divide up his theater of operation.
All right, and I do have a very big subject that I would like to discuss with you, but I have one final follow-up on the compass rose, as well as the angles that would be planned out by the Zodiac Killer. Now, you are an engineer by trade. You are somebody who has clearly worked with these types of disciplines. What do you think of Gareth Penn's statement about how the Zodiac Killer had to have been somebody who was highly educated in the disciplines of mathematics? And we're talking about like a master's level or a PhD level, or the contrary would be, is this some guy who just learned about this stuff in the military? Maybe he's educated in a completely different field, but he learned about all of this in the Navy or the Air Force. Where do you think the real Zodiac Killer would have been in terms of his educational backgrounds?
So, I think Gareth Penn likely is making those statements based on the use of the term radians, if I recall.
That's the start, right?
And I don't think you have to be super educated to know about radians, to be honest. Most of us encounter them in geometry in high school. The problem is we just forget about them after we learn about them, because nobody says, go up to the end of the road and make a pi over 4 turn or whatever. But so I do think the man was likely very educated. I think at least probably undergraduate degree, likely probably a master's degree. I think, but the reasons I think that are not so much what he's doing with the compass rose and whatnot. It's more, I believe he wrote the citizen card, the post-canonical card in which he was talking about Badlands, the movie.
That's right.
And since that's not as his persona, I think that card is actually the closest representation to his actual self that we have. And if you look at that card, that is pretty educated, actually. And, for me, the phrase "as evidenced by" is a telltale sign. You don't hear a lot of people saying that. That is the mark of an educated mind, in my opinion. And, you actually take the citizen card and put it to a readability analyzer. It's actually pretty high level. I did that, and it's like grades 11 to 14 or something like that. And then I took, just out of curiosity, I took an article I wrote and put it through, and it was, 8 to 10 or something. So I think that's a pretty good indication that he's pretty educated. And like I was mentioning before, the whole interpretation of radians that I was giving, which again is related to radians, but it's different because it's a subtle interpretation of the mathematical meaning of the unit of radians. It's not just the fact that he used the word radians. It's what I think he likely meant, or why I think he likely used the unit radians. I think that is likely an indication of significant mathematical knowledge. And if you look at the codes, especially the 340, once it was solved, by David Baranchak and Sam Blake and Jarl Van Eyck. The rearrangement of the symbols that was done, that is the mark of a very left brain type person. I don't think many people would do that. Now, not to say that they wouldn't be capable of doing it, but not many people would do that.
You said a left-brained person, like you meaning by left-brained, that was someone who was using the creative sides of their brain?
No, the logical, mathematical side.
Oh, okay. I thought that was the right brain. I guess I got it backwards. Excuse me. But so you mean like he's using the logical and mathematical sides of his brain to create the 340?
Yeah.
I would agree with that, and also I think that you might be spot on with the Badlands card, because that's the one that also uses the term consternation, and just to say that some type of educated doofus who happened to have learned a few things probably wouldn't use the word consternation in a sentence ever. So I'll give you that one. I mean, I think
and public sensibilities. It's just it comes across to me as a very educated piece of writing, even though it's, pretty small and short.
But, on this note, though, Michael, are you familiar with the channel Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
No, I'm afraid I can't say that I am.
That guy made a Zodiac series, and he used your books as the primary source for his Zodiac research. And he brought up an observation that you had discussed, and, I mean, this is a little bit underwhelming now that you haven't watched these videos, so it's going to sound like it's kind of coming out of left field, so to speak. But I would really just like to know what you think about one of his observations, because he was discussing your books. You good with that?
Yeah.
Now, did you state previously that you thought that the Zodiac Killer may have been committing crimes up until perhaps 1970 and writing letters until 1971, and that he could have been committed to a mental institution for 1972 and 73, released perhaps at the end of 73, early 74, and then after being committed, that he no longer had the either compulsion, desire, or urge to kill, and that's why the letters in 1974 are all about putting an end to the Zodiac persona, and as you just stated with the Badlands card, which came in 74, also looking at this perhaps more honest version of his true personality in the letters. Now, did you make those types of comments previously?
I never said that I thought he was committed. I don't think he was committed. I thought that he might have received psychological help, therapy or something. Because if you look at the Count Marco letter and you look at the articles that were leading up to the Count Marco letter, the Count Marco articles that were preceding the letter, I have this on my website. I call it 10 Days of Count Marco on ZodiacRevisited.com. And I also talk about it in the book. And in the book, I got rights to and published the one that was almost certainly the motivation for the person to write the Count Marco letter. And in that letter, Count Marco is deriding psychiatrists or psychologists, I can't remember offhand, but in a very sort of arrogant way. And so I'm basically was saying it's very interesting that the killer is essentially sort of defending psychiatrists against Count Marco. And, you know, the 1974 communications and the Badlands letter, he says not that the glorification of violence was ever justifiable.
That's right.
To me, that is an acknowledgement that what he did was wrong. That is as close to an apology as you're ever going to get. But that is basically saying not that what I did was ever right. And so it's very interesting to me that you have the killer reappear, you have him kill off his Zodiac persona. You know, it's essentially committing suicide in sorts. Even though he doesn't use the phrase, this is the Zodiac speaking, and he doesn't even write the symbol. So in my mind, that means that persona's actually been dead for a while. But he was never happy with how it ended. And once he saw The Exorcist, and, you know, in The Exorcist, Father Karras gets possessed by the demon and then commits suicide to save the kid. In my mind, that symbolism was very powerful to him. And so he decides, you know what? This is the perfect time to have my persona commit suicide, essentially. And so he writes the Exorcist letter. And then he essentially is saying that what he did was wrong in the Badlands letter. And then he goes and defends psychiatrists. He's incensed at Count Marco for attacking psychiatrists. So you put all three of those together, and I suggest that there is a possibility that he actually receives some form of psychological help. And
but if
I don't
may,
think he got put away or committed anywhere, but I think he may have gotten some form of psychological help. Now, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But I think it's certainly a possibility. And it is consistent with the sort of, I wouldn't say hidden meaning, but it's maybe not at the surface level, but it's just below the surface with all of those writings.
But just to get like some point of clarity, because the thing that I really wanted to ask you about this was, because, you know, you've been challenged on this one a little bit, is how exactly do you think that would have gone down? Do you think he's just seeing a therapist once a week? Do you think he was medicated? Or do you think like, he had like a full-on psychiatric evaluation and they're like, oh, well, this is your problem. You got to do this, this, and this. And he actually was able to sort his life out and he just started feeling differently. What exactly do you think would have happened in those 2 years that would have altered the Zodiac so greatly?
Well, I mean, I guess it's more like 3 years, right?
Fair enough, yes.
I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those things that we couldn't possibly know. It could be relatively simple and minor, or it could be something significant and major. I really don't think he was committed or locked up or anything. I will say that. But apart from that, I mean, if what I'm saying is true, then, he would have had some interactions with psychiatrists probably. But, the extent of those interactions, I don't know. It's just unknowable.
But that's totally fair, though. But, Michael, as the interview winds down, I would like to just give you the floor now and ask, do you have any final message for the listeners of Black Box Online Radio? And, I mean, you can always tell us where people can get your books. I think most of the audience has already found them at this point, but just in case. And are you working on anything new, anything else you'd like to promote? And also, any final observations about the Zodiac Killer?
So yeah, my books are available at Amazon and on Spotify. I think during Kindle Unlimited, if you have that also. And then of course you can order them from wherever you order books. Let's see, I don't really have too much that is in the works right now. I'm trying to start to do more in the Zodiac space again. So I may have something more sort of in the near future, hopefully. We'll see. Anything else to add? No, I guess that's about it. I mean, of course, I could talk about the Zodiac all day, but and if you don't have anything in particular, then I think it's good.
Well, we'll definitely have to get you back on the channel once again. If you're going to be more involved in the Zodiac space, you're always welcome here on Black Box Online Radio.
Thank you, Ned. Appreciate that, and I appreciate your listeners spending the time.
And thank you too, Michael. And one more time, I would like to thank Michael Cole for appearing on Black Box Online Radio's Zodiac Monday. And I'm going to now talk about the Consult Podcast, which is a program that discusses a lot of things related to criminal profiling, and Michael Butterfield was a guest on there. And we also need to do one more thing before we get started, and that is give out the award for the Comment of the Week. And every week I'm going to choose one of you guys who has left a comment here on BBOR, and it can be about any of the episodes, the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, D.B. Cooper, and if your award is chosen, then you will get the highlight for the comment of the week. And this one comes to us from 6string735, and this says, "For me, this is by far the most interesting description of the case," referring to Michael Cole's Zodiac Revisited. "I love the reference to geometry, angles, as well as the idea that the killer developed his persona along the way. Is it all true? Unfortunately, we will likely never know. I so want to know." Well, 6string735, you get the award for the comment of the week for this reason. I want to know the truth, and I'm sure that you do too. If you've listened this far into the episode, I think that you want the truth about the Zodiac Killer. But it's looking less and less likely, unless there is some type of major breakthrough, or there is some type of harder piece of evidence that is not widely discussed in the general public. This might turn into a Jack the Ripper style cold case, and I sure hope that doesn't happen. And those channels out there, like the one that I played at the beginning with the AI script, are doing a lot to hurt the case. They are spreading pure disinfo. I cannot say that enough. But we just have to be optimistic and take it one day at a time. But 6string735, you get the award for the comment of the week. And Michael Cole has shared something very generous for the listeners of Black Box Online Radio, and that is that if you get the award for the comment of the week over the next couple weeks, you will get a copy of Michael Cole's Zodiac Revisited in audiobook format, available on Spotify 100% for free. 6string735, if you would like your copy of the Zodiac Revisited in audiobook format, you can contact me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com to claim your prize. And I told you guys that River Prom Pottery recommended the Consult Podcast, but I also have to give a shout out to JZap, who says, "Hey Ned, just curious if you've checked out the Consult Podcast with Michael Butterfield." And that is what I'm going to be discussing right now. As I said, there were multiple recommendations for this. And the Consult Podcast is one that is definitely taking the safe route. They're really trying not to speculate so much. And I only listened to episode 1. I'll be discussing episode 2 next week. And they started out by saying that criminal profiling is something that can be very frustrating because it doesn't give you the perfect answers. It doesn't tell you who the killer was. When people look at certain clues to try and analyze the behaviors and actions of this unidentified serial killer, in this case the Zodiac, It doesn't tell you the name of the Zodiac, and I think a lot of people are really bothered by that, but I think that those are some of the most valuable approaches that we have. And even when you look at Michael Cole's Zodiac Revisited trilogy, he openly talks about fact-based speculation for a reason, because he's trying to look at the facts and then making deductions and discussing what the facts could suggest. What does the evidence suggest? So the first point that I would like to discuss is one that was actually answered very well by Michael Butterfield, but he's on the show, the Console Podcast, and they openly call the Zodiac Killer a liar. They're saying that the Zodiac wrote multiple ciphers: the Z408, the Z340, the Z13, and the Z32. The Z408 and the Z340 have been solved, but the Zodiac said that he was going to reveal his identity, and in both the Z340 and the Z408, the identity of the killer was not listed. The killer is just a total liar. And Michael Butterfield actually gave a pretty good response, because I was thinking this the whole time right before he said it. We have not completely solved the Z408. We still have the final 18 characters which have not been solved, and that is referred to as the Z18 code. A lot of people, like Michael Cole, for example, would just say that the Z18 does not have a precise meaning. Richard Grinnell has also talked about this on ZodiacCiphers.com, just saying that it's a piece of filler, it's something that was a mistake on the part of the cryptographer. As opposed to just writing a line to even things out, he actually made a mistake when he was writing out his symbols. That's why the Z408 almost looks like it has a line that's been omitted, but that is just a guess, right? Think about what I just said. We're talking about making deductions, and we're talking about interpretations of the evidence. That's just an interpretation all the same. If the Z18 has never been truly identified, then we don't know what's in it. We don't know what it says. And that could have something that is related to the killer's identity. And Michael Butterfield talked about two possible solutions. One of them is the famous Robert Emmett the hippie. That's what people think that the Zodiac's Z18 means, Robert Emmett the hippie, which might not even be referring to a person, but rather the statue of Robert Emmett, the Irish revolutionary, in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And the other one was, before I meet them, I pity them. And that is something that I think a lot of us have thought about. Even if you go back to my oldest episodes about the Zodiac Killer here on BBO War in 2017, I talked about this one YouTuber named T. He just went by the name T, and he said that his solution to the Z18 code was, before meet the thy pity. And I'm like, now wait a second, is that really what the Zodiac was intending for us to find? Before meet the thy pity? Before I meet them, I pity them. That's at least a little bit more coherent. But a lot of us look at the Z18 code, and we begin to think that it has the word before in it. My absolute first instinct when I saw this for the first time back in 2011, whenever it was, is just that it means before, because of the shapes of the letters. And some other things that were discussed, though, in the Console Podcast that I found to be the most interesting and most engaging were when they were saying that the Zodiac probably has some similarities to other serial killers, and probably has a lot of differences compared to other serial killers, because every criminal is going to do some things that are just a little bit unique. And the host of the Console Podcast actually said that when you look at a serial killer like the Golden State Killer, and you look at a serial killer like BTK, they are not similar at all. They are very, very different. And I was shocked when I heard that. The Golden State Killer is, of course, Joseph D'Angelo, and BTK is, of course, Dennis Rader. I actually think that BTK and the Golden State Killer are very similar for the following reasons. I think this because, number one, they were both the serial killers. Okay, that's the elephant in the room. Number two, they were both home invaders. Number three, they both tied up and bound the victims. BTK's name means bind, torture, kill. And number four, they both targeted males and females. Number 5, they both wrote letters and taunted their victims, and of course BTK wrote in all types of things. BTK even made his own codes, and he got busted for mailing in a floppy disk. BTK came after the Golden State Killer, so that only makes you wonder. But the the Golden State Killer wrote Excitement's Crave. He also made a phone call that was very, very taunting to a victim. He's creating these types of threats and terrorizing things. I think the Golden State Killer was definitely more focused on the sexual aspects of the murders, and BTK was more focused on the torturous aspects of this, where it seems like if the Golden State Killer was using some type of torturous method, it was done for a very specific reason, just to secure the victims. And yes, he does want to have physical access to them, but he wants to secure the victims. I'm sure he enjoyed all of it, but that's what it is. It's like there is a very, very strong MO connection, whereas with BTK, he made the binding and the torturing part of his persona, literally. So if you want to call that a difference, but I think that those two are very similar. Whereas with the Zodiac Killer, the Zodiac is extraordinarily different compared to BTK and the Zodiac. I always bring them in. BTK and the Golden State Killer. Some people out there like Aunt Lisa and Aunt Penn might already be on my tail saying, well, that's because the Golden State Killer and the Zodiac are the same person. No, I don't think so. I think the Zodiac is different compared to BTK and the Golden State Killer because the Zodiac mostly restrained victims, not for a sexual reason, and not for a torturous reason. The Zodiac was a sadist, but he was not a torturer. When he tied up the victims at Lake Berryessa, it was done to restrain them, so he could stab them and walk away. When the Zodiac Killer is attacking people, he really doesn't seem to be concerned too much with murdering them. It's just so he has access to the newspapers. Very different than the Golden State Killer. BTK is almost halfway in there because BTK definitely seemed like he wanted to make this persona. I mean, he gave himself the name the way the Zodiac did, but that's the Zodiac's primary objective. BTK was an absolutely more physical and hands-on killer than the Zodiac. But those are just my immediate takeaways from the Console podcast, and once again, that was from just Part 1. They have a multi-part series that I'll be working into episodes of Zodiac Monday, so thank you to the people who recommended that one. And also, please feel free to check out my bonus episode on Thursday, where I'll be doing the Zodiac React video, and True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning will come out tomorrow for the Tuesday show, and that's going to be it for me now. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and then there is BlackboxNed88 on TikTok and Instagram, and I will see you over there. Goodbye.